Good morning, everybody. A few days ago, there was a horrendous attack on Heaton Park Synagogue in Manchester. Every time someone is killed, it's horrible for them and their families and the community they come from, of course. I hadn't said anything about that at the time because I wasn't really sure exactly what was going on with it. And there's been a lot of reaction to the event, and it has been weaponized on both sides of the political divide. It's been weaponized by the left in one direction for one purpose. It's been weaponized by some people on the right, not me, but other people who have an agenda which I don't have and don't share, and they have been using it very foolishly to weaponize it in another direction. Now, the first thing to say is that there are about 50 homicides every month in the UK. The media decide which ones they give attention to, and only about 5% of all the homicides that happen in the UK, it's about 500, 600 a year, ever make it into the national mainstream news. 95% of them you never hear about at all. This is the terrible thing with so many stabbings going on. A lot of them you just don't get reported on at all. They may get a page in the local paper, but they don't get talked about in the mainstream media. So 95% of murders, homicides don't ever get mentioned at all. And of the ones that do, some of them stay in the news cycle for one day, for 24 hours, and then go away. It's very, very rare that a homicide is spoken about and then it stays in the top of the news cycle for days and days and days, as this particular homicide, hate crime, terrorism, different people are calling it different things, has done. And when that happens, it tends to get weaponized and it tends to be used to advance certain agendas, as this certainly has done. Now, it's no surprise that some people on the left bring out the old boring trope, oh, Muslims are the real victims, whereas the person who did this was actually a Muslim. Look, this is the picture of the guy here. Jihad al-Shami, as we all know. So someone called Jihad actually was, it's not funny, sorry, but it's just the name. It's ridiculous. He's actually waging jihad here in the UK by killing some Jews, or killed one Jew, another one was killed by the police at the synagogue. So for some people on the left to turn around and say, well, Muslims are the real victims, when this was a Muslim who had actually committed a homicide, is ridiculous. But that's just clownish and it's expected. It isn't going to do anything. What is more disturbing is now the reaction on some parts of the right from people that I know and would agree with on many, many other things, such as the ridiculousness of the trans agenda, the ridiculousness of climate alarmism, the net zero agenda, the need to stop rapid, uncontrolled replacement migration, and many, many other things, the need to be financially responsible. But some people on the right have weaponized this and said, oh, look, British Jews don't feel safe, therefore we need to stop protests for Palestine because they are hate marches. I do not think they're hate marches. I think the protests for Palestine, where people are waving Palestine flags, are marches against the ethnic cleansing and ongoing genocide in Gaza, which is happening in real time by the state that calls itself Israel. And the lowest estimates for the number of people that have been killed, mostly women and children, are about 70,000. Some estimates from within Palestine itself say there's 600,000 people have been killed either directly by bombs or shells dropped on residential areas by the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, or have been killed by being injured and not having recourse to medical treatment, or being starved to death by the blockade of Gaza also being carried out by the Netanyahu regime, whereby people don't have enough to eat and they're starving to death. But there's not one person on the right, among people I know, who are calling for a ban or a stop to Palestine protests, who have actually mentioned at all the plight of the people in Gaza. And I think that's absolutely appalling. And either they're stupid or they are paid and they are advancing a certain agenda and narrative in order to get something done at the behest of, obviously, the Netanyahu regime, the Israeli handlers of many politicians via the Conservative Friends of Israel and other groups like that, who want an end to any demonstrations anywhere in the West that support the plight of the people of Gaza. So the people on the right who are now using this incident in Manchester, horrible incident, terrible incident, no one should be killed, everyone should be safe. One person has died here, but they're saying people are not allowed or should not be allowed to go out and call for an end to the murder of hundreds of thousands of people in Gaza. That doesn't make any sense at all. But they're doing this without mentioning it and playing right into the hands of the left-wing, censorious cultural Marxists who want to close down protests that they deem and label as far right. So what's happened since all of this massive call from people on the neocon right to stop protests in the UK for Palestine is that Shabana Mahmood, can you believe this is the UK Home Secretary, the British Home Secretary? It's unbelievable. But she has said that she's going to give police extra powers to stop protests or ban protests. This was a tweet there put out by the Home Office today. Obviously, Shabana Mahmood is in charge of the Home Office. It says police will be granted new powers to restrict repeat protests when there is a risk of serious public disorder. And this is all being done on the basis that the British Jewish community doesn't feel safe. Therefore, we must ban anyone from going on the streets to talk about what's happening in Gaza. The two things are completely unrelated. And of course, if the police get extra powers to stop Palestine protests, they will immediately turn around and use them to stop protests against migrant crime, migrant hotels, so that the government can carry on its program of bringing in military-age men to disperse them all around the country in hotels and HMOs, houses of multiple occupancy, and so on, with impunity. And it's not the Palestine protests which will be the most affected by any new powers. It will be people that are deemed to be far right, the very people who are stupidly or nefariously calling for a ban on protests. And this is something I've spoken about many times over the last 2 years. Some people on the right are now becoming a mirror to the cultural Marxist left and are calling for a ban on free speech for a certain group of people that they deem to be anti-Semitic, absolutely mirroring the cultural Marxist left that calls for bans on people that they call homophobic or transphobic or Islamophobic or racist or whatever other phobic thing you can think of. And it's just the wrong way to use a terrible event to try to make something happen politically, which is actually going to come back and shoot yourself in the foot. And if you're not careful, blow off your own head, metaphorically speaking, of course. I'm not speaking literally. So it's quite disturbing how people on both sides of politics in the UK have weaponized this event and that it was weaponized immediately within a few hours of it happening. I'm speaking 4 days after, because I think you need a bit of time after something like this has happened, because it's just not decent to talk about something where someone has died and been murdered, and obviously is the people who have been killed, their families are obviously in great shock and grieving. But many other people have tried to do this already, and we need to affirm that everybody has the right to protest. There should be no restrictions on the freedom to protest. The ancient fundamental freedoms. We have free speech, freedom of expression, freedom to protest peacefully, not to be violent, not to be abusive, not to harass anybody, but to protest peacefully about various issues which are going on. And so the protests against genocide in Gaza are absolutely legitimate. I don't go on them myself. The protests against migrant crime and migrant hotels and mass replacement migration are legitimate. I support them. I haven't been on them personally yet, but because I don't live in Epping, I don't live in the areas where they're taking place. And the reason I haven't gone on them is I think they should really be local community protests, which they have been, which they are. I don't want to make political capital out of something like this. I don't think that's right, but I support them. And I absolutely support the right of people to protest against migrant crime. They're both legitimate protests and both legitimate things to protest about. And we need to uphold the right of both of those groups of people and others to continue to be able to protest without restriction. And for people on the right to say, we want to protest about our thing, but they're not allowed to protest about their thing, it goes completely against the advocacy for free speech, which most people on the right have been doing for decades and have now turned away from it and are now being a mirror to cultural Marxists. So people really need to think carefully about what they're doing and what they're saying, and not weaponize something like this, and uphold our right to freedom of speech. And if you want to, the Heritage Party is the only party that actually has this as a principle, that there should be freedom of speech for all. And that includes people that you may not agree with, but are protesting peacefully. You're not allowed to do criminal damage. You're not allowed to stop people from going about their normal business, but you are allowed to protest peacefully, of course. So that is something that needs to be said, and we need to be very, very careful what we're doing on the right, because we should not be advocating for any restrictions on freedom of speech and freedom of expression. Thanks for listening, everyone, and God bless you all.